Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. A tentative agreement has been reached between Canada Border Services Agency workers and the federal government. The capital gains tax will have a huge negative impact on our farmers. That's according to political reporter Brian Lilly, who will have the details. And more pressure is being put on the terrorist group Hamas to accept a new ceasefire deal.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The union representing more than 9,000 Canada Border Services Agency workers has reached a tentative agreement with the federal government. The workers were set to walk off the job on Friday, but will remain pending ratification of the deal. The union says details of the tentative deal will be released after they're shared with members on Thursday. Federal Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland tabled a motion to increase the amount of tax Canadians pay when they sell assets. She says it is a move to level the playing field between millionaires and the middle class.
The idea of taxing capital gains in Canada was first broached by the government of Prime Minister John Diefenbaker and his Royal Commission on Taxation, chaired by Kenneth Carter. In the Royal Commission's report, Carter memorably declared that fairness should be the most important objective of the tax system. He insisted, a buck is a buck is a buck. And Prime Minister Brian Mulroney raised the capital gains inclusion rate to 75%, higher than the rate we're establishing today.
Now, when it comes to some of the changes the Trudeau Liberals are making on the capital gains tax, it is apparently not good news for our agricultural sector. According to political columnist Brian Lilly, this tax will really hurt Canadian farmers.
The Grain Growers Association says this will be a 30% tax hit on farmers who are looking to do intergenerational farm transfers. And the majority of their members in the grain growing sector of the economy, and whether it's in Saskatchewan, Alberta, or Ontario, Manitoba, the major places that this is an issue, the majority of those farms are family-owned. They're not corporate farms. And about 40% of farmers are nearing retirement and want to pass on the land. What happens? They're going to take a 30% hit because of these tax changes.
Mr. Lilly will also discuss if we will ever find out the names of the MPs who wittingly worked with hostile foreign governments during our federal elections. He'll have details coming up after business news. A Calgary Tory MP says the MPs who worked with those foreign governments should be named. Jasraj Singh Hallan says it was a betrayal of Canadians' trust.
Certain members of this House acted in the best interest of hostile foreign regimes interfering in Canada's democracy. This is a disgusting betrayal of Canadians who elected us to represent them in this place. We as MPs are supposed to serve Canadians, not foreign hostile actors. Why is this Liberal NDP government fighting to protect MPs' names, collaborating in the best interest of hostile foreign regimes and not Canadians?
We agree with members of this House that the appropriate forum to look at these matters is the Commission, already set up and operating. Set up, I would remind colleagues, with the unanimous support of all parties in this House. The Hague Commission has access to all of the documents of the National Security and Intelligence Committee of Parliamentarians looked at. Officials from the Privy Council office have already been in touch with the Hague Commission to determine the best way forward. We think that's a responsible way to proceed, not simply standing up and illegally announcing a list of names like my colleague suggests.
Closing arguments have been made in the trial of Jeremy Skibisky, a Winnipeg man who admitted to killing 4 Indigenous women. His lawyers said he should not be found criminally responsible due to mental illness, and the judge has reserved his decision.
Over the last 6 weeks, today has been probably the most satisfying, because we know as a family that we are going to get justice and he is going to get convicted on all 4. There is no grounds for an NCR. He has nothing to reach for anymore. And, when we spoke with the Crowns this afternoon, I stated to them that, the judge needs to do the right thing and convict him on 4 counts of first-degree murder to show this country that it stops here.
U.S. President Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, has been convicted of all 3 felony charges related to the purchase of a revolver back in 2018. Prosecutors say he lied on a mandatory gun purchase form by saying he was not illegally using or addicted to drugs. Biden could face up to 25 years in prison.
Mr. Biden was charged and convicted of all 3 counts, which is 2 counts of making false statements and 1 count of illegally possessing a gun. The trial lasted about a week. It comes at a time when his father, the President of the United States, is running a very contentious campaign. It comes on the heels of former President Donald Trump's trial in New York, where he himself was convicted of totally separate and unrelated charges. What's next in this case is that the judge is going to set a sentencing date that down the line is usually about 2 or 3 months, depending on the district. They're going to do a pre-sentence investigation where they're going to talk to people in his life. And then the judge is going to calculate sentencing guidelines, which means it's a recommendation for what his sentence might be. It might be 0 to 6 months in prison. It might be something more than that. We just don't know at this point.
U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken urged leaders gathered at a humanitarian conference for Gaza to press Hamas into accepting a ceasefire deal with Israel.
Today, as we gather, one and only one thing stands in the way of this deal happening, and that's Hamas. So, my primary and first message today to every government, to every multilateral institution, to every humanitarian organization that wants to relieve the massive suffering in Gaza, get Hamas to take the deal. Press them publicly. Press them privately. And Hamas should not require much convincing. After all, the proposal is nearly identical to one that Hamas itself proposed on May the 6th.
Blinken also announced $404 million in humanitarian aid assistance to the Palestinians in Gaza, the Israeli-occupied West Bank, and neighboring countries. Well, we're learning more and more about the 4 Israeli hostages who were recently rescued by the Israeli military in Gaza. All were kidnapped by Hamas on October the 7th during the Nova Party. TBN Israel's Yair Pinto has more.
The names of these 4 hostages are Noar Gamani, Shlomi Ziv, Almog Meir Zahan, and Andrei Kozlov. All of them were kidnapped by Hamas to the Gaza Strip from the Nova Party on October 7th. For the last few months of their captivity, they were held at 2 different sites in the Nazirat refugee camp in the center of the Gaza Strip. Intelligence analysts from the Shin Bet were able to map the buildings, and together with the Yamam, an action plan was formed. Now that we know the details, it sounds like something from the movies, but this is as real as it gets. To set the scene, the hostages were in a civilian environment above ground in buildings of 3 to 4 stories. Noah was held in one building on the 1st floor, and Andrei, Shlomi, and Almog on the 3rd floor in another building. The 2 buildings were hundreds of meters apart, and the abductees were held alongside Gazan families with many children. Hamas occasionally moved the hostages from the apartment to another apartment, and the fear was that if the 4 attacked only one building, then terrorists would escape with the hostages in the other building.
Well, it has been feeling a lot more like summer than spring recently here in Lethbridge. Jeanette Rocher is now with a quick peek at the forecast. Jeanette, the sunshine and warmer temperatures should be sticking with us for the remainder of the week.
Well, yes, they should be, Hal. And a happy birthday, by the way. You sure had a nice day for it. At 28, we are well above seasonal. So seasonal right now is just under 22 degrees. So it's definitely felt like summer. We're seeing much of that as well on Wednesday. Not quite as high of temperature, but even at 23, we're still higher than seasonal. And then we should be seeing a lot of those mid to high 20s throughout the rest of the week. Now, we're still contending with that wind as well, as we saw those 70K gusts today. We should be seeing those as well this evening, and they should be sticking around into tomorrow. Not quite as strong, but more like 30 to 50 kilometer per hour wind gusts in the morning. And as for the rest of the week, whether or not that wind will stick around is still in question, but one thing's for sure, the sunshine will definitely be sticking around. And I'll be back later in the show to give you that 7-day forecast.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. Calgary Mayor Jody Gondek says residents should expect restrictions on their water use to last well into the weekend. She says she commends Calgarians who have limited their daily water to keep the city from running dry after a major water pipe broke about a week ago. All outdoor watering has been banned, and residents are urged to reduce indoor water use by taking shorter showers and limiting laundry and dishwashing. As for the boil water advisory for the community of Bowness in Calgary, Alberta Health Services says it has finally been lifted. Following the announcement that Shanna Phillips will be stepping down from her position as NDP Lethbridge West MLA on July the 1st, Lethbridge Mayor Blaine Hagan added his comments on the political stress that may have been a factor in her decision to step down.
Running for public office today is much different than it was years ago. And I'm even saying when I started here in 2013, it's much, much different than what it was then. And so I think that there's such division out there. And often I find that we need to be able to work together on common goals. And I'm saying that because we all take, the shots from the cheap seats, if you will. And it's, it does wear on you. It does wear on you for sure.
Mayor Blaine Hagan also addressed Phillips' comments directed toward the Lethbridge Police Service on Monday after several officers allegedly illegally investigated her back in 2017. The officers were never charged, and Phillips accused the LPS of never taking full responsibility.
Lethbridge Police Service has done an amazing job. There may be individuals at times, as there is in any business, but those particular individuals did receive demotions. It was dealt with at a local level. So when we have a comment that LPS let somebody down, it's not LPS. It could be different individuals there that have been dealt with because of their actions.
The officers were found criminally responsible but were never charged despite an ACERT recommendation to do so. Lethbridge City Council has approved updates on its community well-being and safety strategy. Council decided that the original plan created back in 2019 was due for changes since the pandemic. A decision has also been made to bring forward a community board to look after this.
We completed a new needs assessment, which verified and in some cases identified new gaps in our community. And our hope is that all efforts from the community, whether that be through nonprofits, other orders of government, and of course the City of Lethbridge ourselves, are purposeful and are directed to those gaps. Another big change, which is primarily why we were at City Council, is that City Council has agreed to take a step back from their role in approving all the funding disbursements, giving that responsibility to a Community Wellbeing Advisory Board, which will be established, part of a big next step for us. And we hope that we can improve transparency on where funds are going in the community. Obviously, also an effort to make sure that those funds are going to the biggest gaps that we see in the social service sector in our community.
The Community Wellbeing Advisory Board will be taking recruitment applications until July, when 9 positions are expected to be filled. A 24-year-old man sustained life-threatening injuries following a stabbing outside of Club Lime on Saturday night. Police say they responded to the report around 4 in the morning after the man was brought to the Chinook Regional Hospital by friends. It was reported that a group of people were seen running from the area. Police are asking for help with their investigation. If you witnessed anything, please give them a call at 403-328-4444. Lethbridge City Council voted unanimously to provide the Lethbridge Housing Authority with $1.05 million. The funding will go towards the new supportive housing project located at 416 Stafford Drive North. The funds are conditional to the inclusion of key project features that are crucial for promoting safety and well-being. LHA previously received a provincial funding commitment of $10.22 million to build 25 permanent supportive housing units here in Lethbridge. Goats are back in Lethbridge parks. Now, the program, which helps control invasive weeds in selected areas of the Lethbridge River Valley, is entering its 6th grazing season. Jackie Cardinal, Parks Natural Resources Coordinator, says since 2019, over 750 hectares of noxious plants have been grazed. They use a lot of goats.
Right now we have 125. Our program does run 200. Trent tells me that the other 75 will be coming in the next couple of days. They've done a fantastic job, hence why we keep bringing them back. And yeah, they leave very little impact. They are very nimble. They can get to where we can't get people to. So we are really happy to bring them back and have them as part of our program every year. They are trained to eat just the weedy species. So they're not going to hit too hard on the native forbs and grasses that are down here. One of the coolest things is coming in before they are here and seeing the weeds everywhere. and then coming in even after they've started for a few days. Like you can see this area, there was quite a bit, and you don't see hardly any right now. They just eat the weeds. They don't touch the grasses or the native forbs too much.
I guess it's safe to say the city's not kidding around when it comes to weeds. By the way, officials are also asking residents to keep their dogs out of the grazing areas and to not pet the herding dogs or goats while they're hard at work. You know, there's a rich history of stories about the people who made southern Alberta what it is today. There are some fun tidbits of history that we can learn about Lethbridge. Lorianne Johansson, Vice President of the Lethbridge Historical Society, explains how Lethbridge got its name.
Lethbridge was named after William Lethbridge. He was the president and largest shareholder of the Northwestern Coal and Navigation Company. You know how the NMAX Center is named after the sponsor, NMAX? Lethbridge is something similar to that. He got the city named after him because of his money that he invested into the company. He never actually visited Lethbridge at all, not even once.
Make sure you catch the rest of BCN's Jeanette Rocher's interview with Lorianne Johansson from the Lethbridge Historical Society coming up after business news. Well, the Edmonton Oilers have only scored 1 goal in 2 games against the Florida Panthers in the Stanley Cup final. The Canadian club, which is down 2 games to none in the series, is hoping to bounce back in a big way Thursday in Edmonton.
They're a great team. They defend really well. They got a great goalie. Doing a lot of really good things. Obviously, you know, they're playing in the Stanley Cup final. They're making it tough, for sure. It's exciting. It's another opportunity for our group to come together and dig our way out. It's supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be difficult. And I'm excited to see what our group's made of. I'm excited to see our group come together. I'm excited to see us fight through adversity, and looking forward to people doubting us again. You know, we're good with the backs against the wall.
I mean, it's not ideal, obviously, but we have 2 games at home, so you got to take care of business at home. They just did that at home. Now it's our job to go, back to Edmonton and win 2. I mean, it starts with 1 though, so.
Well, it was another beautiful day for a walk around Nicholas Sharon Park today in Lethbridge. So much sunshine and warm temperatures. And that should continue for the rest of the week. A full look at the weather pictures on deck. It was an amazing day for going on a bike ride or maybe running up and down those steps on the coulees here in Lethbridge. Jeanette Rocher is now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, it should be a great time to enjoy the outdoors all of this week.
Well, it sure will be, Hal. We are going to be seeing lots of sunshine all week long, and temperatures for the most part above seasonal. So seasonal is just under 22 degrees. So we're seeing 23 on Wednesday, back up to 25 Thursday, 28 again on Friday. And then there's our weekend at 22 degrees on Saturday. And then we're going to see a little drop in temperature there for Sunday, down to 17 degrees and 18 on Monday. So not a bad looking 7-day forecast, if I say so myself. Average high for this time of year 22. Average low 8 degrees. 33 was our record high temperature on this day. That happened back in 1965, and in 1969 there was the record low right there, only 1 degree. The sun rose this morning at 5:23 a.m. and our sunset this evening at 9:39 p.m. We're looking at 16 hours and 16 minutes of daylight. Okay, on the west coast tomorrow, mainly sunny skies in Victoria, high of 16 degrees. In Vancouver, we've got increasing cloud later in the day, 15 degrees for a high. Now, Edmonton was under a severe thunderstorm watch earlier today and then overnight as well. As we look into tomorrow, we're seeing a chance of showers and another risk of a thunderstorm tomorrow afternoon. 14 for a high there, 20 for a high in Calgary with mainly clear skies, also 20 to 40K winds in Calgary there. In the rest of the prairies, we are seeing those risk of thunderstorms all the way around, and 40 to 60K winds across Saskatchewan tomorrow. Saskatoon and Regina also seeing a 30% chance of afternoon showers, 19 for a high in Saskatoon, 21 is the high tomorrow in Regina, and a high of 24 in Winnipeg with a 60% chance of showers, and could be seeing some thunderstorms there as well. Not so much as we get to the central part of the country. Mainly clear skies here, mix of sun and cloud in both Toronto and Ottawa, looking at 23 for a high in Toronto, 24 in Ottawa, also 24 degrees in Montreal. Montreal seeing beautiful, sunny, clear skies. Now, as we get into Atlantic Canada, we are seeing more chances of showers there, so 30% chance of afternoon showers in Fredericton, Halifax, and Charlottetown, all 3 of those cities. 24 is the high tomorrow in Fredericton. Same thing for Halifax, high of 23 in Charlottetown and 22 in St. John's. Cooler by the coast, though, more like 16 degrees. And then we've got increasing clouds throughout the day. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
A new poll suggests most Canadians with mortgages say they're financially stressed, but the number's even higher among younger homeowners. The survey by Leger says 68% of respondents between the ages of 18 and 34 with a mortgage say they're very or somewhat financially stressed about their home loans. By the way, if you're 18 with a mortgage, congratulations. That compares with 62% across all homeowners. 4 out of 10 Canadians surveyed say they think the Bank of Canada should be cautious as it lowers interest rates, but another third feel it's not going fast enough. A deal to sell the Winnipeg Sun to a group of local investors has been finalized. The transaction was led by Winnipeg Sun publisher and CEO Kevin Klein. The purchase by his company, the Klein Group, also includes a number of papers in Portage la Prairie and Kenora, Ontario. The transaction also includes Postmedia's Winnipeg commercial print division, digital properties, and contracts. The Winnipeg Sun has been in business since 1980 and was acquired by Postmedia back in 2015 from Quebecor Media, which bought it in 1983 and brought it into the Sun newspaper chain back in 1999. There are questions about whether Calgary Energy Company has the means to fulfill a multi-million-dollar reclamation plan that's been ordered by authorities. The Alberta Energy Regulator has told Tallahassee Exploration it has 60 days to complete the first stage of cleanup for 693 wells, 146 entire pipelines, and 75 facilities due to concerns about care and maintenance of the sites. The order, however, says Tallahassee has not demonstrated it is capable of providing reasonable care and measures to protect public safety and the environment, and is unable to meet its regulatory and end-of-life obligations. Officials say Tallahassee has a long history of regulatory and financial problems, and phone numbers for the company's office were not in service this week. The Canada Growth Fund is taking a 40% stake in a project that would turn landfill waste into clean electricity. The project proposed by Calgary-based Gibson Energy would divert solid waste otherwise headed to Edmonton's landfill and incinerate it to create electricity. Carbon capture technology would trap the greenhouse gas emissions created during the process so that none of it would enter the atmosphere. The $15 billion federal fund was created to help reduce the risk private investors assume when they invest in new technologies. Now, here's a look at today's markets.
The TSX was down 182 points on the day to finish at 21,887. The Dow was down 120 points to 38,747. The S&P 500 was up 14 points to 5375, and the Nasdaq was up 151 points to finish at 17,343. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 39 cents to 78.13 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 24 cents to $3.15 US. Gold was up $6.14 to $23.17 and 1 cent US an ounce, and silver was down 47 cents to $29.28 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $8.84 per bushel, barley is at $6.29, canola is at $14.23, and corn is at $7.67 per bushel. Live cattle were down 18 cents to $183.75. Feeder cattle August contract was down $1 to $257.65. Lean hogs were up $1.98 to $101.68, and the Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 72.68 US.
Recapping one of our top stories, the union representing more than 9,000 Canada Border Services Agency workers has reached a tentative agreement with the federal government. The workers were set to walk off the job on Friday, but will remain pending ratification of the deal. The union says details of the tentative deal will be released after they're shared with members on Thursday. There's more pressure on the Trudeau Liberals to release the names of the MPs who are allegedly working with hostile foreign governments. Political reporter Brian Lilly will have more details for us momentarily. Listen, when you see news happening in your community, be sure to send us an email at info@bridgecitynews.ca. Also, be sure to visit our website anytime to check out a number of stories and interviews. As you've heard on Bridge City News, a bombshell report released even more details on foreign interference and said some MPs wittingly worked with hostile foreign governments. Now, to chat about this in more detail is political reporter and Sun columnist Brian Lilly, who joins us once again from Toronto. Brian, will we ever find out who these MPs are? Will they ever be named?
Well, we have to hope that they're named, because otherwise we're going into the next election being asked to cast ballots for people that may or may not. There have been plenty of parliamentarians, both MPs and senators, because while it's sitting elected MPs, there's also, they use the term parliamentarians, which tells us that there's probably a few senators in there as well. So look, we're not going to vote for senators. Some of them will thankfully retire out. But when it comes to October 2025 or sooner, if we go to the polls before that, can you imagine saying, well, I don't know, is my guy working with China or with Iran or with India against Canada? You don't want to think that about any MP. I always get upset when people think the worst of an elected official because they don't share the same party. A quarter century of covering this stuff, Hal, I find that even when I don't disagree with the person's policies, most politicians are in it for the right reasons. We have different points of view on how to fix a particular problem, but they're in it for the right reason. If you're working against Canada with a hostile foreign country, you're not in it for the right reason. You don't deserve to be in Parliament, and voters deserve to know. But so far, the Liberal government is saying no. They're refusing to do it. They're saying, well, the Hogue Commission can look at that. Well, that doesn't mean the names will be released. And they're saying, well, we don't have a perfect list of names. Well, you know who's been accused of this. You could let us know. But they've said so far, boo-hoo, get over it.
Brian, the Trudeau Liberals have been taunting Pierre Poilievre, saying he just needs to get his security clearance and then he can read the report to find out all of the details. So why hasn't he done that?
Well, if he did read the report from the National Security Committee of Parliamentarians, he wouldn't be able to do anything with it. He, as he's put it, he'd be handcuffed at that point. David McGuinty is the chair of that committee. He's done a good job, very good job considering the circumstances. Longtime Liberal MP from Ottawa South, and he's expressed the frustration at the government not providing enough information. But they've written the best report they can. They've released it. Last week he was asked, "Well, what can you tell us?" And he said, "All I can say is what is in the published report." And by the way, the government redacted a lot of things from the report. He said, "I can't say anything more than what is in there, or I will be charged criminally. I will be violating the law." So if Pierre Poilievre gets his security clearance, and the reason the Liberals keep bringing this up, by the way, is because they say, well, Poilievre he couldn't pass a security clearance. There's dark stuff in his past. None of that's true. He had security clearance while he was a cabinet minister. He'd have no problem passing one if he even has to go through one again. But if he reads the report, he can't even act on it. He could find out there's a half dozen dirty Conservative MPs in his caucus. If he acted on that, he'd be telling everyone that they were named in the report. Well, could he then face criminal charges? Yes, absolutely. So the idea that Poilievre reading this report after getting security clearance will somehow solve things. No, it'll make it harder for him to ask the government questions, to push on things, because if he reveals anything, criminally responsible. And then the idea that the party leaders can just deal with this themselves, that they can be informed and remove bad apples in their midst. Well, again, no, they would then be in violation. The Prime Minister could stand up in the House of Commons today and detail everything that he knows. He would be protected by parliamentary privilege. The public would know. We could make our own decisions and say, okay, well, here's the evidence against so-and-so. That's really bad. Or, well, I think you're misreading it. And we could decide, are we going to vote for them or not? But the way they're trying to do it now, they're treating us like mushrooms, Hal, keeping us in the dark and feeding us, you know what.
Mm-hmm. The federal government has moved ahead with their capital gains tax changes, Brian. This despite speculation that they would maybe make some changes to offer carve-outs for some, including doctors. That hasn't happened yet. Now, Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland offered warnings of what would happen if this tax does not pass. What is she saying?
She was at a news conference on Sunday in Toronto announcing this and describing everything in the darkest terms. I mean, she said that democracy was at stake if this capital gains tax change doesn't happen. She described a future where the well-off have to live in gated communities with ever higher fences, using private healthcare and jets to get around because the rest of us are outside seething so much with red hot anger. I mean, she made it sound like people would be out with pitchforks and torches if this tax change wasn't passed. You know, and she's also describing it as it's only affecting the uber wealthy. You know, just before talking to you, I got an email from the Canadian Grain Growers Association, one of many farm groups that have come out against this, along with medical associations, professional associations, basically anybody self-employed. And the Grain Growers Association says this will be a 30% tax hit on farmers who are looking to do intergenerational farm transfers. And the majority of their members in the grain growing sector of the economy, and whether it's in Saskatchewan, Alberta, or Ontario, Manitoba, the major places that this is an issue, the majority of those farms are family owned. They're not corporate farms. And about 40% of farmers are nearing retirement and want to pass on the land. What happens? They're going to take a 30% hit because of these tax changes. Doctors are warning about, retiring, cutting back their practices, or relocating. This is horrible policy that's just about trying to show up the Conservatives. This is partisan tax policy that's going to be detrimental for the economy.
And Pierre Poilievre has finally come out and said that he's opposed to the tax changes. This is apparently what the Liberals wanted, Brian. Poilievre stayed quiet for a couple of months, but what is he saying now?
He's come out with a very strong opposition to it, and he's lined up a lot of the groups who I've mentioned and many that I haven't, including Canadian Federation of Independent Business. They represent small businesses. They're trying to show that this hits a lot of people. It's not the uber wealthy. The way, corporations have a really bad name in official Ottawa right now. Even though corporations are often your family doctor or the family farm or your dry cleaner or your restaurant owner, they're all incorporated. So those guys are taking the biggest hit if you're incorporated. And then for the rest, the Trudeau Liberals are trying to make it sound like this only hurts a very small group of people. Basically, Galen Weston, who's become persona non grata. He's the personification of evil in official Ottawa because he's wealthy. This is not who it's going to hit. And so Poilievre is showing with all of these groups why this is bad for the Canadian economy, how it's going to hurt innovation, it's going to hurt job creation. And quite frankly, I don't think it's going to generate the revenue that they think. Every time that the Trudeau Liberals have said, we're just going to go after the wealthy, it hasn't brought out the returns that they expected. The reason is we don't have a lot of super wealthy here in Canada. And the super wealthy, they've got the accountants and the lawyers to move money around. This is going to hit small and medium-sized businesses that are family-owned. It's going to hit family healthcare at a time when we really can't afford to be losing any doctors.
And impacting our farmers, as you mentioned. Brian, the Trudeau government was boasting about its record on gun crime recently. Now, you looked at the statistics, and apparently those stats show that they don't really have a good record.
No, they don't. And it's one of these things where the Trudeau Liberals like to make announcements, and the announcement is the policy. And you say, well, what about the results? Well, I announced that I was doing this. Isn't that good enough? No, it's not. So Marcy Ian is my MP. She's the MP for Toronto Centre, former CTV on-air personality. And she was the one that I spotted. And I thought, doesn't she know that in her own city, there was a horrific week of gun violence? And by the way, it wasn't caused by duck hunters and sport shooters. There were drive-by shootings. A 14-year-old boy shot coming out of his apartment. 2 men after, an old-timer soccer game on a Sunday night. 2 men were gunned down after 2 guys jumped out of an SUV and fired more than 50 shots at the group of guys just relaxing after the game. This is what's going on in her own city. But across the country, violent crime is up. Gun crime is up. We're seeing carjackings in parts of this country. Do you remember when carjacking with a gun being pointed at you was something that we thought of in LA? This doesn't happen in Canada. Ooh, I don't want to go to Los Angeles. You might get carjacked with a gun. That's happening in Canada right now. And the Trudeau Liberals, their only reaction has been to make life more difficult for hunters and sport shooters, while making life easier for gangsters with guns. They've lessened the sentences. They've made bail automatic, except in the most extreme circumstances. Even their recent bail reform, most people still get automatic bail with the least onerous conditions. This is a government that isn't serious on this issue, but wants to play it up and use it as a wedge issue. And if you're not with them, then you're bringing in American-style gun control. Absolute garbage.
It appears as though the Trudeau government is making it a little easier to come to Canada, offering anyone who comes to work as a caregiver be given permanent residency. Now, there are reports that they're also giving faster work permits to asylum seekers.
And both of these, Hal, are going to be used and abused. Look, I understand, especially here in Ontario, where the majority of asylum seekers of late have been coming, and it's a strain on the social service system. Premier Ford has been saying, well, let them work, and then they're not on welfare, they're not going to food banks. Let them get a job. But what this will do is incentivize people to say, well, I'm going to Canada to declare asylum. I'll claim I'm a refugee. There are large groups coming from certain countries where 70, 80% or more are rejected because they're not real refugees. They're economic migrants that are using our system to jump the queue. Now they get to hear, oh, if I do that like my friend did, I get to work as well. That's going to increase the number of asylum seekers. Secondly, on the caregiver side, there are already videos being put out on websites and social media by the immigration consultants telling people, hey, you can use this caregiver program to bring your brother, your sister into Canada. You can get your family here, do family reunification quicker by saying they're coming to look after your kids. This again is being used and abused. And the Trudeau Liberals don't know what to do on immigration. We've added 600,000 people to this country in the last 6 months. That's all immigration. That is not birth rate. We have a below replacement level birth rate. 600,000 people since December 19th. That's untenable. Even the PM says we're bringing in people faster than we can absorb them.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, Brian, was in Calgary recently for the meeting of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. Now, there was a point where Trudeau was booed, and then he, kind of kicked back, relaxed, and laughed at the audience?
Yeah, he was asked a question about the ballooning debt, the deficits, the fact that he's added $1 trillion to our debt since coming to office, and when are you going to balance the budget? And Trudeau went on this long rant about how great the Canadian economy is doing at a macro level. I mean, the rest of us are dealing with rising unemployment, housing affordability crisis, food affordability crisis. The economy for the average person is not doing as well as it used to, and he wants to point to a number or a study from an international group. That's not going to sit well with Canadians. Telling them they've never had it so good while things are going badly, it doesn't work. But at the end of the answer, yeah, he went on about the carbon tax and made his claim that 8 out of 10 people are better off with the carbon tax. That's been proven false when you factor in all the extras that are added onto it. But Trudeau will never admit that, and he denies the existence of the Parliamentary Budget Officer's report on that. So he just said, and you're better off with my carbon tax, sat back, the audience starts booing, and he lets out a cackle. Who cackles? Who laughs while they're getting booed by an audience? And the FCM is, it's city councilors, it's mayors across the country. City councils are used as recruitment grounds for Liberal politicians at the provincial and federal level. This is normally very friendly territory for him, and he got booed.
Brian, a by-election is taking place in Toronto to replace former Liberal cabinet minister Carolyn Bennett. Now, this has been a Liberal stronghold in the past. Any chance the Tories can maybe sweep in and steal the seat?
I don't see it happening. It's close, and I've talked to Liberals who live in the riding who are upset and have voted either for the NDP or the Conservatives, but it's been a Liberal stronghold since 1993. The last Conservative to win it was Barbara McDougall. She won in 1984 and 1988 with Prime Minister Brian Mulroney's sweep. So maybe there's an outside chance, and if they put in a lot of resources and effort from the Conservative side into getting out the vote, then they've got a shot. they've got a guy running named Don Stewart. He's up against Chrystia Freeland's former chief of staff, Leslie Church, longtime player in the Liberal Party. So there's two good candidates out there for people to decide on. I will say that provincially, the Liberals thought that they would win this one at the Ontario legislature. It went to the NDP. So, cross your fingers if you want to see a change. But if that riding goes from the Liberal column into the Conservative one, it won't go to the NDP federally. But if it goes Conservative, there are people who've said that Justin Trudeau will have to resign the next day because that's an indication of how bad things are. So maybe, if it goes, maybe that's the telltale sign that there will be a Conservative sweep like Mulrooney had in 84 and 88. But I wouldn't be putting money on it on BetMGM or any of these online betting apps just yet.
Political reporter and Sun columnist Brendan Lee, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you, Hal.
Well, Lethbridge and southern Alberta have a fascinating, rich history to look back upon, and we perhaps don't take enough time to reflect upon it, but today's guest is going to help us do just that. Lorian Johansson is the Vice President of the Lethbridge Historical Society. Welcome to Bridge City News, Lorian. Great to have you on today.
Thank you so much for the invitation. I always love to talk about Lethbridge's history.
Awesome. Okay, well, with that said, maybe give our viewers a brief snapshot of what your organization is all about. It's not just Lethbridge history, right? But Southern Alberta, all of Southern Alberta?
That's correct. Okay. So the Lethbridge Historical Society is a chapter of the Historical Society of Alberta. Our chapter covers the Southern Alberta region, sort of from just south of Calgary down to the border. So it does encompass quite a lot of Southern Alberta, including all of the small towns. They are free to access our resources, and we do a lot of work with them as well. We do tend to focus on Lethbridge because that's where we're based, but we do also cover a lot of other things in the region.
Okay, great. Well, maybe give us an idea of what takes place at a typical meeting or gathering of the Lethbridge Historical Society.
Well, we have several different options as far as gatherings. On the fourth Tuesday of every month during September through April, we host a general meeting for our membership where we conduct a little bit of business and then we move into a presentation format. We invite guest speakers from all different walks of life come and speak to our members and guests about things that are relevant or interesting. We've had horticulture, and we've had how to plant a victory garden in your front yard or backyard. We've had, it was fascinating as what kind of vegetables you can grow in Southern Alberta that you can then turn around and eat to be a little bit more self-sustaining and environmentally conscious. That was a really great one. We've talked about our Plaques and Monuments project. Anything that really would be fascinating or interesting to our membership and to the general public. So that's one of the ways. We do also conduct tours, walking tours of the city and local area. Some of them are the Downtown History and Beer Tour, which most people are familiar with. That was initiated by the LHS here. And we do some for general public. We do some for the membership. So we have a lot of tours that take place throughout the year. We have several coming up, actually, over the next few months. And then the other thing is to join the Executive Council and sit on the board with the rest of the team. So that happens on Monday. So there's several different ways to get involved.
It sounds like it. So obviously this is something people can join in. How can people maybe join up for your group?
The easiest way is to attend one of the general meetings and sign up for your membership with one of the executive that's there. We do also have a website, lethbridgehistory.org, and memberships are available through there, as well as a contact us form. So if you have questions, you can certainly submit an email request and somebody will be able to guide you through becoming a member.
Okay, so why don't we begin with the name of the city? So I think a lot of people assume the name Lethbridge stems from the famous bridge that spans the coulees, but that isn't necessarily the case now, is it?
It's not at all the case, actually. Okay. Lethbridge was named after William Lethbridge. He was the president and largest shareholder of the Northwestern Coal and Navigation Company. You know how the NMAX Center is named after the sponsor, NMAX? Lethbridge is something similar to that. He got the city named after him because of his money that he invested into the company. He never actually visited Lethbridge at all, not even once.
Oh, wow. Well, that's disappointing. So it all
It is
comes
a
down to
little.
money, right?
Unfortunately, that's the case. It has
Yeah.
been for a long time.
It's a little bit more of a romantic notion to think it's about the bridge, really.
Sure.
I can see why the rumor got started.
Absolutely. It makes sense, but it's completely a coincidence that it's Lethbridge and we
Right.
have a bridge.
And then we become Bridge City. Yes, I know.
Yeah.
That's so interesting. So, I mean, speaking of the bridge, that iconic high level bridge is often referred to as the longest in the world. And there are, of course, longer bridges elsewhere, but I believe it's still the longest of its specific type in the world. Can you maybe share a little bit about the history of that bridge?
Of course, the bridge is in fact the longest for its height and style in the world. Nobody has built anything that's longer and higher of the same style trestle
And
bridge.
that would be like a trestle bridge. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
It was announced in 1906 and completed 3 years later. It is still the largest single railway structure in Canada. It was put into place to shorten the trip to Fort Macleod. Instead of having to go down and around the river valley, the bridge was put in place so that they could just skip over the top and shave off several hours at least of their train journey. The walls on the side of the bridge, you've seen them there. They're to make sure that the trains don't get pushed off by our wind, our beautiful wind in southern
Oh
Alberta.
my gosh, that's scary.
It's a
I didn't even think that's a
safety.
possibility, but now that you said it,
Well, you know, the wind can get pretty powerful down here in southern Alberta, so they put those measures in place. The construction of the bridge is actually considered a national historic event. Over 100 men worked on the construction of the bridge. There were a few deaths during the construction. Safety measures for workers were not what they are now. There is a very famous photograph of two men leaping off the last structure to be lowered into place. They were promptly fired after that. They did not die, but they were fired for their shenanigans.
oh my gosh, I think I have seen that picture, and they're jumping
Most
basically into
people
the
have,
river,
yeah.
right?
But they're jumping from the piece of steel off to the side of the
Yes,
bay.
where the
Yeah.
land is. Okay, yeah.
Yes.
So it's not as high as we think at that point, but
No,
still.
no.
Still, safety first, gentlemen. Come on, let's not give other people ideas, right?
You know, in the early 1900s, they didn't have fall safe harnesses. They didn't have
There
any
was
of
no
those
such
things.
thing as safety back then, basically.
That's right.
I
Which
get
may
it.
be one of the reasons why safety harnesses and whatnot were put into place
Yeah.
as we moved through the 19th and 20th centuries, because people did things like that. I don't know. That's just my speculation, but it makes sense.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so moving on from the bridge, we have a school named after, so we've got some other famous names here in town. So we have a school named after Nicholas Sharon and a hospital named after Sir Alexander Galt. And both were businessmen who started coal mines here. So to what degree did coal mining impact Lethbridge in the early years?
There were over 100 mines in the Lethbridge coal fields, somewhere between Picture Butte and McGrath. In 1919, we were the highest producing coal field in Canada. And it helped to determine where Lethbridge was built. It brought in industries such as Lethbridge Iron Works. It was a major employer, brought a lot of families to the area, and started other communities like Colehurst and Diamond City. Uh, it's almost impossible to quantify the importance of coal mining to our development. Uh, it it was the founding reason for Lethbridge's construction here. And then as we moved out of coal mining, that's when we moved into more of an agricultural community, but we definitely started as that industrial coal mining location. That's why the city sprang up where it did.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, in addition to that, Southern Alberta has a rich Indigenous history. So the River Valley has a park named Indian Battle Park, where Fort Whoop-Up is located. So maybe share a brief history about that.
The Indian Battle Park is the name that was chosen by City Council in the 1960s. And it specifically refers to a battle in the fall of 1870 between the Blackfoot Nations and the Cree Nations. It was a winter camping area protected from the weather and that. And where the high level bridge is now was a very natural crossing point in the river. We do have a book about the Indian battle that went on there, several different editions. But the story of how these two nations fought over rights to the land and the ability to camp there, it's much more than I could cover in such a short time. But that's why it's named that, because our Indigenous peoples camped there and wintered there to stay safe from the elements.
Yeah, and then of course, speaking of Indigenous people, people from around the world travel to Alberta specifically to visit Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump. So for any viewers who have never heard about this or have ever been there, what is that all about?
Head Smashed In Buffalo Jump it's a national historic site, it's a provincial heritage site, and a World Heritage Site, all of which were designated through the 60s, late 60s into the early 80s. It's a place where the Indigenous peoples would drive the buffalo off the cliff in order to harvest them. It is definitely a fascinating interpretive center there. If you haven't been, I definitely recommend it. It's a very eye-opening look into how Indigenous people manage to hunt in such large capacities. And there are guides and books available online that give you a lot of the details of the history of the location, but where it's one of our national heritage sites that we're very proud to be quite close to Lethbridge.
Yeah, I believe it's a UNESCO heritage site, isn't it? Yeah,
yes.
That's amazing. Okay, now, Lorian, you mentioned agriculture earlier, and of course that is a big part of Southern Alberta, especially the sugar beet industry. So I believe that that also brought quite a few Japanese immigrants to our area. So maybe can you tell us a bit about that?
The sugar beet industry has been operating in Lethbridge to this day since the early 1900s. You are correct. Some Japanese immigrants moved here. They were recruited to work in the first factory in Raymond and in the beet fields. Some of these families their descendants are still in and around Lethbridge. During the Second World War, 2,500 of these Japanese Canadians were relocated here by the government to work in the beet fields. It was considered later in life, it was considered a human rights violation to uproot these families and move them here with no choice in the matter. The Canadian government did issue an official apology to the families in 1988, but those families did settle here, and some of them remain here to this day, at least parts of them. So the sugar beet industry has always been important to Lethbridge and agriculture, some for good reason, some for bad, obviously. I mean, history, we like to think of history as this happy, nostalgic style thing, but some of Canadian history is not pleasant and it's not nice. And we have to acknowledge that before we can move out of that cycle. They say history, those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. So by studying history and the real, honest, nitty-gritty facts about it, perhaps we can avoid those sorts of things as we grow and develop as a society.
Yeah, the more you learn about it, the more you can avoid it. And yeah, exactly. It's fascinating though, Lorian. And moving on from there, Lethbridge, an area also known for its history of irrigation canals. Much of that was put in place by our Mormon community. So that of course, has really influenced the culture of Southern Alberta, hasn't it?
It has. Lethbridge and Southern Alberta, heavily Mormon. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. They've brought a lot and contributed a lot. The agreement was made by Alexander Galt with the LDS Church so that their settlers would build canals, and then they received land and money as payment for their work. They were brought in because they came from Utah originally, where they were experts in dryland farming and the different skills required. And it was able to transform the area around Lethbridge to make more crops possible because we needed high dollar value crops to be able to be grown here. So that it was sort of they got to move to somewhere new and get land and money for it. We got the benefit of their dryland farming knowledge and irrigation.
I am learning so much here. It's fascinating.
Lethbridge is so rich in history and how all of these things that we see now still. We drive over irrigation canals and we see the sugar beet factories, and we go down to the park and we see the mine sites of 6 and 8, Galt Mine 6 and 8, that are still, the ruins are still there. And Lethbridge exists because these things were brought in, and this area of the world was made hospitable.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's awesome. Thanks so much again for being with us today. It looks like we're out of time, but we really appreciate having you on here, Lorian.
Well, thank you so much. I would just like to mention that we do have several members-only tours coming up in April, June, and October. So if you'd like to get involved with the bars and taverns or the murder mysteries of Lethbridge's past, please go on our website, get a membership, and then those tours will be open for our members. And we welcome members of the public to our general meetings, again, the 4th Tuesday of every month, usually at the community room in the public library.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Lorian. Very, very interesting. Great to have you on today.
Thank you again for the invitation.
Absolutely. Lorian Johansson is the Vice President of the Lethbridge Historical Society. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks so much for watching.